for October 1st. Hard to believe we're already into October, but welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. So we'll call the meeting to order. And the first item here is the approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any recommended changes or additions to the agenda? Not seeing any. We'll consider the agenda approved as is. Next is the approval of the August 6th, 2025 TAC meeting minutes. Does anyone have any comments or questions or additions to the meeting minutes? Or I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved. Chris Hartzell, Woodbury.
Thank you, Chris. Do I have a second?
Second, Howley Chanhassen.
Thank you. So we have a first and a second. Is there any additional comments or questions?
Hey, Rubjent. Or anybody. Dakota County Library.
Aye.
Hennepin County Piper.
Ellis here. Aye.
Oh, I see. I accidentally hid your name. Sorry about that. You are the member. Unhide. All right, sorry. Ramsey County Isaacson. Scott County Jensen.
Aye.
Washington County Leitner. (7W) Houseman. Egan Mathis.
Aye.
Eden Prairie Scholes or Ellis.
Aye, Ellis.
It's Bradley Kozlucher.
Aye.
Chanhassen Howley.
Aye.
Brooklyn Park Culver. Woodbury Hartzell. Aye. Lakeville Omi.
Aye.
Plymouth Thompson. Minneapolis Engineering Hager.
Kathleen Mail says she's having audio issues, so maybe come back to Minneapolis at the end here, Joe.
St. Paul Engineering Nick Peterson.
Aye.
St. Paul Planning Collins. Metro Transit on.
Aye.
Suburban Transit Fighton.
Aye.
The building is the Masonic home that's next to us. Is it, like, what does that mean?
Bicycle Sabota.
Aye.
Pedestrian Turner Bargain. Deed Eddie.
You used to all the land.
Mac Reef. Community Development Boylan.
Aye.
Freight Meyer. Metro McCartney.
Aye.
MPCA AO.
Aye.
MTS Peterson, Steve.
Yep.
And Tab Kotsukos.
Yep.
I heard you both. And then we'll go back to Minneapolis Engineering. Hager. Mayel.
Aye.
All right. Chair, was a little tenuous
Joseph,
early. I'm
Joe,
sorry.
Nancy Spooner Walsh, the DNR.
Oh, technically that seat's been empty for a long time, but yeah, I'll take your vote. And that is 22 ayes, Chair, and no noes, and it was tenuous for a while.
Do we have anyone joining us today that would like to offer comment from the public on the agenda or some other item?
Chair, we heard from nobody, so.
Wonderful. Thanks, Joe. All right, I'll ask again. Any questions from the public? Okay, not seeing any hands raised. We'll move on. The next item is the TAB report, and we'll turn it over to Elaine.
Thank you, Chair. TAB met on September 17th. For the chair's report, Hovland reported that the Dakota Land, Water, and People Acknowledgement will be discussed at the October TAB Executive Committee meeting and then reported back at TAB on their discussion. Hovland met at Mystic Lake for a meeting with tribal leadership for a preview of a movie, The Seventh, that is being filmed in Minnesota. And there was also a webinar that included the U.S. Conference of Mayors for discussion on transportation funding and infrastructure. There's more pressure on local roads with changing travel behavior with the increase of delivery trucks. For the MnDOT report, Sahijim reported that in August there were 7 traffic fatalities in the 8-county area. The metro area continues to have about 1/3 of the statewide traffic fatalities and about 2/3 of the statewide pedestrian fatalities. The legislature appropriated $47 million in general obligation bonds in the 25 session for a local road improvement program. The LRIP provides funding for capital construction costs only. The application opened September 16th and closes December 12th. Grants will be awarded up to $1.5 million per project. For the MPCA, Amanda Garrett Smith reported on MPCA's open grants. There is a grant open for EV fast chargers along highway corridors through December 9th for $1.89 million. There's an open grant for freight switch locomotives until October 22nd. And MPCA is working on updating the climate action framework. It will be available for public comment in a few months. For the Metropolitan Airports Commission report, Hovland reported that MSP was named the best mega airport for customer and traveler satisfaction by J.D. Powers, and there was a state of the airport meeting on September 18th. For the Metropolitan Council report, Deb Barber has been appointed the chair of the Metropolitan Council by Governor Walz. For the Suburban Transit Association, Gary Hansen reported that suburban transit providers report continued overall ridership increases. And also TAB members requested a report on state fire park and ride usage and locations. There has been a reduction on park and ride locations, and there was a request for consideration for transit passes to the state fair on the transit also. There was no business items. For information, there was an update on the Blue Line extension and Gold Line extension TPP amendment, comment report, and final amendment. And then there was an update, provided information on electrical vehicle public charging needs analysis. And this is also on the TAC agenda today. TAB members requested information on the data's current and future use and charger reliability and potential partners. Gary Hansen mentioned that the legislature established the Electricity as Vehicle Fuel Working Group. Their task is to study options for equitable assessment of the use of electric vehicles on roads. This working group must submit a report by February to the legislature. And then there was also an information on travel demand management update. And that's my report.
Thank you, Elaine. Do any members have any comments for Elaine? Okay, not seeing any. We'll move on. Thank you, Elaine. Next, we'll move into the committee reports and business. And first off, the executive committee did meet this morning at 8:15 a.m. virtually. In addition to discussing today's one action item, we also discussed upcoming meeting agendas. The next couple meetings will be very busy, as you can imagine. We've got the regional solicitation development well underway. So there'll be some action items coming forward in November and likely December. If not December, likely January then. And then with that being said, we also discussed how should we have the platform set up for the next few meetings, whether it's in person or virtual. Like all of us know, when you have these detailed conversations like this, it's beneficial to be in person. So you can see the discussion, kind of gauge the feeling in the room. So with that in mind, for the November TAC meeting, we're going to plan to have that in person. And depending on how the action items go in November, then December will tentatively be in person. If for some reason, based on feedback from TAC or TAB in November, the team needs to go back and retool some of the proposed applications or what have you, then potentially the December meeting could be a virtual and then come back in January for an in-person, but we will keep you apprised of that as we move forward. Then the last item we discussed is, I think all of us are aware that the federal government with the shutdown, well, how does that impact us? And so, although we don't have a lot of the details, I want to turn it over to the Vice Chair, Molly McCartney, to provide an update, just a very brief update from MnDOT's perspective on what they know as of today. So Molly, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. So yeah, as we know, this is the first day of the federal fiscal year 26. The state fiscal year runs July through federal transportation dollars with the regional solicitation, and otherwise wanted to give you an update. Federal funding for transport is relatively stable during a shutdown. The authorizations and grants will be honored, but there'll probably be reduced staff. So I don't know what our counterparts at our Minnesota Division office are staffed at right now, but I'm thinking there's a few people around. Projects will continue. Contractors will be reimbursed. It won't have a lot of impact in our world, at least if it's short. If it's longer, there will be more impacts. Other things with transportation that are affected, FAA will continue operations. I know I've heard things like people will be required to work, but maybe not being paid as regularly as they are. But again, safety staff and otherwise are reporting to duty. That's really all I have on that. Let me know if you have any questions. We can try to get them answered.
Thank you, Molly. Any questions for Molly about that? Okay, not seeing any. If anything comes up, feel free to raise your hand. With that concludes the executive committee report. Next, we'll move into our one action item today, which is item number 2025-29. And that is a streamlined tip amendment request for funds that were received for the Reconnect Rondo's Reconnecting Communities Pilot Program Planning Grant. And so I'll turn it over to Robbie King here, if you'd like to add any additional details on this one.
Chair. Yeah, it's 2025-29. It's a streamlined tip amendment. Reconnect Rondo is a nonprofit organization based in St. Paul's Rondo neighborhood. They received a $2 million Reconnecting Communities Pilot Program Planning Grant from the USDOT in January of this year. These funds will be to conduct National Environmental Policy Act review and related activities for a highway cover between Lexington Avenue and Dale Avenue in St. Paul. You can see the funding amounts there, $2 million from FHWA and $500,000 in other funds. Recommended motion this morning. Recommend that the Transportation Advisory Board recommend adoption of an amendment to the 2026-2029 Transportation Improvement Program to add Reconnect Rondo's Reconnecting Communities Pilot Program Planning Grant. I'll stand for comments or questions.
Thank you, Robbie. Any questions for Robbie? Or any comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
This is Russ from Egan. So Robbie, did you do the cost estimate on this with regards to your fiscal constraints? My point of the question is I've never built anything like this before, but I have constructed a few overpasses of freeways, and the $2.5 million cost, it just surprises me that that is adequate to construct what's being proposed.
This is a planning grant. Sorry, Chair and member, this is a planning grant. So this is to conduct some of those activities and other related planning activities. No construction is involved in
Gotcha.
This project.
All right. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, thank you, guys. I see Molly, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. TAC members, I'm going to preemptively tell you about my the action I'll take, which is going to be to abstain from this vote because of the MnDOT's rethinking I-94 environmental impact statement work, and that a land bridge is being studied by Reconnect Rondo in that area. MnDOT personnel will be abstaining from a vote just to ensure impartiality amongst those different processes happening. Thanks.
Thank you, Molly. Any additional questions or comments on this item? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved, Patrick Boylan.
Thank you,
Second,
Patrick.
Brian.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. So we have a first and a second. Any additional questions or comments? Not seeing any. This is a roll call vote. Mr. Barbeau?
Thank you, Chair. McPherson,
Aye.
Carver County here.
Hey, this is Drew Plummer here for Linden. Aye.
Laborie,
Aye.
Ellos,
Aye.
Isaacson,
Aye.
Jensen,
Aye.
Leitner,
Aye.
Hausman,
Aye.
Mathis,
Aye.
Ellis.
Aye.
Was Lucher,
Aye.
Howley,
Aye.
Culver,
Aye.
Hartzell,
Aye.
Omi,
Aye.
Thompson, Hager, Mayel,
Aye.
Nick Peterson,
Aye.
Collins,
Aye.
On,
Aye.
Fighton,
Aye.
Spooner Walsh,
Aye.
Sabota,
Aye.
Hunter Bargain,
Abstain?
Eddie,
Aye.
Mac, anybody here?
Hi, yep, I'm here. Aye.
That's Reef, right? Boylan,
Yep.
Aye.
Meyer, right? McCartney,
Abstain?
AO,
Aye.
Steve Peterson,
Aye.
and Kotsukos. Chair, we had quite a run of people with audio problems early. That's 28 this time, and 0 against and 2 abstentions, so 30 people.
Wonderful. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. That action item is approved, and we'll move forward to the tab for further consideration. That completes our action items for today. So the ink was hardly dry on that 26 tip plan. So, but we got our first amendment. The next item here, just a quick update on the TAC Transit Technical Working Group. Bradley or Joe?
Hi, Chair. That group did not meet last month, so there will be no update. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Barbeau. Next, we have the Planning Committee, and I'll turn it over to the chair, Gina Medico.
Good morning, everyone. TAC Planning did meet in September, and we had 2 information items. The first one was about the Regional Bicycle Transportation Network and Regional Bicycle Barriers updates. So if you recall, localities, jurisdictions were allowed to submit potential changes to the RBTN and RBBS for Met Council consideration. So Steve Elmer walked us through that process, talked about the evaluation criteria used and the results of that analysis. That item will be coming back to us at TAC Planning next month for action, and then back to this committee after that. So many of the RBTN submissions were approved. Some were delayed due to a pending study on rural connections, and there were a few that were not approved. We also had another information item, which is the item we will hear today about the EV public charging needs analysis. And like I said, we will plan to meet in October. We have a couple of information items and 1 action item. Sorry, I have a very elderly dog in the room with me who's making noise. Apologies.
Thanks, Gina. Appreciate that update. Any questions for Gina? Okay, not seeing any. We'll move on. Thank you. Next, we have the Funding and Programming Committee, and we'll turn it over to the chair, Mr. Kuslucher.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We did not meet in September, but we have a pretty heavy agenda coming up in October on the 16th. So we're hoping that members can really make a point of it to attend. We're going to be going over funding categories for regional solicitation and also active transportation, funding limits, so on and so forth. So it's going to be the first. We're going to make up for not having a meeting in September with this upcoming meeting.
Wonderful.
And I believe staff said the agenda will probably be out next week. So.
Okay, thanks, Jim. And that is the first day of MEA. So for those with your calendars full, yeah, appreciate it if you can attend that. Thanks, Jim. Any other questions? Oh, I see we have a hand raised.
Sure, I
Yes.
will add that Robbie sent a little survey to see who's available, and it looks like we're going to have a quorum. So sometimes trying to move a meeting because of MEA or something ends up costing as many people as MEA would. So that meeting will be the 16th as opposed to some later date for those of you who thought it might be possible that it would be changed.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for that update, Joe. Any other questions for Funding and Programming Committee? Seeing none, we'll move on. So next we'll move into our information items. The first one we have on the docket here is the electric vehicle public charging needs analysis. And I believe we got Mr. Fisher with us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair and members. My name is Tony Fisher. I'm a transportation planner in MTS. And this is an item that was before tab last month, as mentioned. And it did go 53 minutes due to a lot of interest, conversation, questions. It does not need to go that long. Let me get that on the screen.
And Tony, just a heads up, it's at least my sound is a little muffled. So I'm not sure if it's the microphone on my end or what it is.
Is that better?
That's a little better. Yep. Thank you.
So the electric vehicle public charging needs analysis, this is a project that was in the UPWP and the TPP's work program. We have hired HDR to do this work, and Siri Simons is leading that work for us, and she did present at tab last month. So let's see. So just an outline of the presentation today. I'll touch on the kind of project objective and approach, project timeline, some of the background information that we've developed already, and then approach to estimating charging needs and gaps. So what we're trying to do with this work is a planning level analysis of the remaining gaps in publicly available electric vehicle charging. So we're really looking at what's out there in the field, what's going to be needed in the future, and understand that gap. And then importantly, prioritize what part the public sector might play, because the private sector is doing a lot of work in this area, but our role is really to make sure other places aren't left behind and to accelerate, work towards those, accelerate EV adoption and work towards our climate goals. So with this work, we will be engaging stakeholders, collecting background data, and really the work lands on an interactive map that shows those gaps and then prioritizes those gaps for the public sector. So with this work, we want to accommodate and accelerate light duty EV adoption. We want to set this up to inform a potential regional solicitation EV charging category. And then we were awarded that charging and fueling infrastructure grant in January that was put on hold. And there's quite a bit of uncertainty around that, but if that does come to fruition, this could also inform the prioritization of those funds. And then we are hoping that this work can serve other people that are investing in public charging, like cities in many cases, utilities, and others. So it'll all be publicly available. So the scope of the project is really this category of background information that we've been working on. We have started to engage a few groups of stakeholders that I'll touch on a little bit more. And then we're doing the work to estimate the future needs and gaps in the charging system. And as I mentioned, we'll land on that interactive map and in a summary report. So we did start this project in July, and we anticipate finishing it about April. We're working on a bit of a scope amendment that might push that out just a little bit more. The scope amendment is just to do a little bit more work in the area of level 1 charging. So that's really trickle charging, and it has kind of a narrow role, but could be a pretty important role. So we just want to do a little bit more work in that area. So I'll dive into some of the work that we've done already, some of the background information. When we look at public EV charging, we are not talking about that first column here, residential charging in your garage or otherwise at home. And we are not talking about really long trips across the state or nation, large rest stop areas with a lot of charging and really high powered charging. We're really talking about charging that supports live, work, and play with an electric vehicle. So imagine most of these trips are in the Twin Cities, and it's I think it's a lower part of our VMT when we get to those longer trips. So we're really focused on that daily live, work, and play. And that comes in these two highlighted columns, two flavors that we are looking at with this project. We're talking about community charging, and that might look like on-street parking in front of somebody's house or multifamily housing, single family or multifamily housing. That could be level 1 charging to take advantage of light pole power that's available, or it could be purpose-built level 2 charging. Level 2 charging, you're probably going to fill up your battery overnight. Level 1, you might get enough to get through the day or not, depending on. And then we're also looking at a category we're calling destination charging. So that looks more like when you go to your grocery store or maybe a commercial street, and that probably it could be level 2 charging if you're thinking about places where people stop for more than a couple hours. But if you're talking about places where people are in and out in 30 minutes, we're probably talking about fast charging in those types of locations. So I touched on it just a bit on the earlier slide, but our really key point to this is where are people stopping and for how long? And so we've done an analysis to look at that. This is using replica data. So it's I think it's analogous to our regional model here in the cities, but it's just a different model that takes in survey data and tries to represent travel patterns. And with this replica data, we were just able to get a little bit more detailed geography on some of these trips. And so when we looked at really not just electric vehicle trips, but gasoline vehicle trips and, the passenger vehicles, where they're going, how long they're stopping in the region. And we made some assumptions to think through, like which of these vehicles are more likely to be looking for a charge when they're out and about, and which ones are less likely. So we did assume that multi-family residents will always seek a charge. We did assume that residents of pre-1920 buildings will seek a charge 80% of the time, just because some of the hurdles to, installing home charging in those kind of buildings. And then in more current houses, we are looking at homeowners will less frequently seek a charge because they're more likely to invest in their own charging at home. And home renters are more likely to seek a public charge because they're just less likely to have access to that at home. And then for trips where that vehicle drives more than 150 miles a day, we just use the assumption that everybody's going to look for a charge at that point. So there's some work to be done on these assumptions. Importantly, we are trying to think through the role of income, whereas higher income people, even in an older home, are more likely to have access to that home charging, and lower income people less so. So that results in a number of maps. An example here is on the right. So we have a map for less than 30-minute dwell time, so the amount of time somebody stops at a location, 30 minutes to 2 hours, and over 2 hours. And you can see this map highlights a lot of the region, and important to note that some of the geography isn't the same size for all these, so it kind of probably exaggerates some of the larger geographies in this case. So we took a crack at normalizing it. Here's an example of how that turns out. This happens to be the 30-minute or less dwell time maps. So on the left, you can see that kind of raw data. And on the right, you can see it where we divided it by the acres in that geography. To try and normalize it, we also got feedback at tab to think about normalizing it by population or population density. So we're definitely going to think through that a little bit. Yeah, how that would work out. So we can use the normalized data to determine the number of chargers in a geography and then potentially use the raw dwell events to prioritize locations. Really thinking about fast charging, where you can get a pretty good charge, 80 from 20% to 80% in 30 minutes a lot of times in locations where people stop for less than 2 hours. And then focusing on level 2 charging in places where people stop more than 2 hours. Level 2 is kind of what you would have if you had an electric dryer at home. So it's not a large amount of power. The costs are more reasonable. The impacts on the grids are less. There are just a lot of advantages to using level 2 where we can. So one group that we did engage were the utilities serving the Twin Cities region. We had a number of good conversations. And they had pretty consistent feedback. They did support this kind of work, this communicating across agencies and working together on this kind of a problem. They really weren't too concerned with the type of charging installations we were talking about in terms of their grid capacity and their load, because a lot of times when we're talking about say 4 fast chargers at 150 kilowatts is pretty substantial, is 600 kilowatts of power, and that's just not a level where they're going to be very concerned. It's not going to trigger large investments and long lead times on their part. So that was really good to hear. Now that's a very different case if you're talking about on the a lot of these Tesla charger sites. If you have a dozen fast chargers, that's a very different case. But that wasn't the focus of this work here. So we did ask about publicly available data for where their grid has more spare capacity and where things might be more difficult. I think Excel was the only one that has that publicly available. Other utilities were willing to review our prioritization and give us feedback on which of those locations might be problematic. But going back to the earlier point, we don't anticipate this being a major hurdle. So we did ask the utilities about the potential of using their utility poles for public charging stations. And there are a number of advantages for the charging station installer and owner, lack of need for right-of-way and that kind of thing. But the utilities were pretty unanimously against this kind of thing. They either said no or not soon, just because of the complexity it adds to their pole. They have a lot of very expensive and mission critical equipment on those poles, and they're just not, they're going to be kind of risk averse in not adding other things to the pole. So it was just good to know. Another topic, we talked about load management. So the dream is really to match EV charging to when there is excess capacity on the grid, potentially excess solar during the day, excess wind overnight, and really trying to avoid the peak period 4 to 8 p.m. when they're most likely to be turning on gas peaker plants and using higher carbon sources of electricity. And so we had inquired about really potentially placing charging stations in a way to support where their electricity capacity exists, potentially serving workplace charging, really leaning into level 2 charging where it's more spread out versus peaking with the fast charging. And they weren't too interested in pursuing that. They were more interested in, a lot of them use time of use rates. So they'll give you an opportunity to charge overnight for a lower cost. But in return for that, they're going to charge you more during the peak period or during the daytime. So that's really their strategy to match the charging demand to when they have capacity and low carbon capacity. So we do have scope to reach out to some multi-unit residents and other underserved communities. We haven't done that yet, but we started out by just doing a literature review nationally and locally on work others have done. I just want to set this up by, there were some concerns at TAB about the way this was presented. And so I think it helps to understand that people's opinions are informed by their history and don't necessarily represent, for example, their race. But we did, when talking to people, they did report, historically underserved populations did report that at-home charging was less important. That could be due to higher populations in rental housing. They did report a top reason for wanting to adopt electric vehicles is reduced costs, importantly, fueling and operating costs. And then a top concern was personal safety. You can imagine charging at night in a dark location could be concerning for a lot of people. There's interest in workplace charging and concern for extreme weather. You can think about a lot of these locations need some kind of weather protection, whether it's from wind in the cold winters or from sun in the hot summers. And then it was great to find out that multi-unit residents were very willing to drive electric vehicles without home access to charging. They're very willing to lean on a public charging system, publicly available charging system, not necessarily publicly owned. So we did get into estimating charging needs and gaps, and I'll show you where we're at on that. These are on the right, you'll just see those same categories of charging stations and the highlighted ones that we're focused on with the study. So we started out with identifying those existing charging stations in the Twin Cities. We started with the Alternative Fuel Data Centers database. It's a Department of Energy database, and then we looked at a number of other actors to see what additional information might be available on their websites, and from talking to a few providers. EV demand, and I'll get to that a little bit more on another slide. And then, as I kind of touched on, we're working to match the right charger for the right times and forecasted EV demand. And then we're going to layer on the region's goals as described in the Regional Development Guide and the TBP. So I'll get to that in a little bit too. So here are 4 of the 5 goals for the region. We did not try to prioritize natural systems with the EV charging placement, but in terms of an equitable, inclusive region, we thought that a way to approach that was to prioritize charging for residents without access to home charging. So multi-unit residents, people that might depend more on on-street parking and don't have that off-street parking at home, that kind of population. We think we can advance healthy and safe communities by prioritizing locations that have below average air quality, and MPCA has a data set for that. And then we're trying to think through how to advance dynamic and resilient region, and then we're trying to think through if there's a way to promote some redundancy in the network. A lot of times a fast charging location might have a pair of level 2 chargers at it. In case that fast charger is down, there's at least some kind of backup option, or even having a couple of fast chargers if demand warrants it would provide some of that redundancy. And then importantly, how to advance really addressing climate change. We want to site chargers at high traffic locations, and we want to provide some minimum level of coverage across the region. And those aren't entirely thought through. Siting chargers at high traffic locations might come directly in conflict with, not trying to interfere with the private sector. And so those are things we're still working through some of those details. So we are working on we have a number of different EV, electric vehicle demand forecasts out into the future. The That top blue line represents the statewide multimodal transportation plan's goal. The next blue line represents pre-2025 EV forecasts. I think it's about a dozen different forecasts that were available. And then we do have a couple of forecasts that were done since this summer's federal legislation, and that red line represents those two new forecasts. And so when we think through the charging network that we're planning for, we're trying to think, I think what we're working towards is probably something in the middle of these three lines. We don't want to lean too far into it and, plan too far ahead where we're just, where investments can go anywhere and they're not really focused. But we also don't want to plan for too pessimistic of a scenario. So that's kind of the thinking there.
Tony, quick question here. I know you're just, actually, I'll just let you finish up, then I got a question for you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
All right, thanks, Tony. Brian Isaacson just posted a question in the chat. Is there info on the share of EV users that are in multifamily housing without access to home charging now?
Chair and members, I don't know that I would have information in terms of numbers that would represent the region, but I think anecdotally it is a challenge. Yeah.
Okay. It kind of goes back to that one slide where you're talking about those that exist in the multifamily. They're not necessarily needing it at home, but they want access to it somewhere in the network. Is that kind of what you were seeing?
Yeah, Chair and members, at tab, the word ecosystem came up, and I think that was a perfect word to describe the public charging system that we need. Yes, there's some people that are going to have a harder time charging at home, whether it's because of their income or the age of the building, and they're probably going to lean more on public charging systems or at work charging. And there are others of us who have the benefit of home charging, and I think it's the figure that's often quoted is something like 80% of charging is going to happen at home, probably more so if you have that home charging.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Any other questions or comments for Tony on this item? Okay, Tony, I just wanted to just bring up, I know like you mentioned earlier in the presentation at TAB, it was a pretty robust discussion, kind of went off on a couple different paths. But one of them that I thought was worthwhile, maybe just if you want to briefly bring it up here, is what are the opportunities for that public-private partnership, teaming up with potentially, like the Quick Trips and the Circle K's and that type of thing, where you have these convenience stores that, they look at the market, they determine where they're going to put their stores based on where the users are with internal combustion engines. Is that same type of philosophy maybe worth looking at for EV type infrastructure? And then, I think I had made a comment too that one of the things I note in our neighborhood is there is a public charging station just down the road at one of the mall areas, and frequently you see it vandalized or it's missing the charging cable because there's a lot of copper in there that people want to steal, or it might just be broke down. I think there was some interesting information shared on that too, like what the uptime or the committed uptime is for these things. So maybe just share a little bit on that.
Yeah, Chair members, great points. So reliability is a key concern and a topic in the industry. The federal NEVI program, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, that MnDOT's running has some pretty aggressive requirements. I don't know if it's 97% uptime or something in that range. And then MPCA reported during the TAB meeting that they've also had stringent uptime requirements in their grants. However, they've really struggled to get people to meet those uptimes. I think there are a number of things that have been going on in the industry. We've had right now there are 3 different standards that are pretty common out there, and so 3 charging standards, dozens of automakers, creates a really complicated problem. And luckily, the United States has adopted a single standard going forward. So these automakers are moving over towards the North American charging standards, what was the Tesla standard essentially. And so I think that's going to help with reliability. I think there are strategies out there. There are, so in Europe, a lot of what they do is the charging stations don't provide the cord. You bring the cord with you, not for fast charging, but for level 2 charging and level 1 charging. So that's another approach. There are the pole-mounted chargers. Some of them have retractable cords, so the cord doesn't come down until you initiate payment for that charging. So they're just, it is a problem. There are a number of, there are a lot of people trying to work through that problem of reliability. In terms of Quick Trip, I'm not sure I cut everything you're getting at, but I think, yeah, the intent, I think we see the private sector as partners in this. A lot of times, even if a city is building a charging station, maybe more so they're doing some of the planning work and then they're writing a check for design and installation and maintenance. Because this is a pretty specific kind of infrastructure that they might not have a lot of experience with. And so that's definitely a scenario. I think, the NEVI program, I think a lot of that has gone to some of these convenience stores along interstates across Minnesota. And I'd anticipate that if the regional association were to fund projects that I would think there'd be a lot of public-private partnerships, but that the federal funds can kind of be that jump start to, if you can get some help with the capital costs and some of the initial operating costs, that can kind of make it pencil out for the private sector.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Yep, you covered what I was looking at. I think, just some of the commentary that was shared at the TAB meeting is when you think about your family, if you've got some young kids in the car with your wife or your spouse and they're traveling and they've got an EV, you'd hate to see them parked after dark in a Menards parking lot. I think that was one of the examples given, sitting there and no one around. Maybe the lights are turned off in the parking lot and they're trying to charge their car. I know as a father, I'd much more appreciate seeing them at a convenience store where there's people there, security cameras, lights. They can go in the store, buy a bunch of snacks they don't need. But with that, just appreciate the information today. Any further questions or comments on this?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Tony, I just have a quick question. In the slides toward the end, you show about, I think about 60% EV maybe penetration by 2030. In the studies or research we're doing, do you know what type of interest was shown on community and destination charge, the two that you were looking at? Are there high interest or people planning to maybe buy the EV cars if there's available charging stations around their area?
Karen, members, great question. So I think it's not that one is more important than the other. I think, we're all different, and some of us travel up north every weekend in the summer, and some of us don't do that very often. We're mostly in the Twin Cities, and some of us have home charging and some of us don't. So I think, MnDOT with the NEVI program is doing great work across the state. MnDOT with their electric vehicle infrastructure needs assessment looked beyond the interstate system to what the needs were for those long distance travel. And so that MnDOT work is a great complement to, I think, the work that we're doing now, which is really looking at that live, work, play, day-to-day need.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Innocent. Thanks, Tony. Any other further questions? Not seeing any. Appreciate your time, Tony. Thanks for some action from the TAC. So if you're not involved currently on either one of the special working groups or the technical steering committee, please reach out to your team members that are, so you have a good understanding of what's going on. I know we're all busy, but we have some important milestones to meet here in the next few months. So With that, I'll turn it over to Steve and the team.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And Molly, I think you're gonna kick us off as the project manager.
Yep,
Maybe,
thanks.
maybe we should know too, Mr. Chair, before we get going, we did invite TAC planning members and TAC funding and programming members, and they should feel free to raise their hand and ask questions and provide comments here too. So,
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thanks for pointing that out.
all right, Molly.
All righty, well, welcome everyone. As Joe said, here's the meat and potatoes of our presentation. A lot to go through about the update for the regional solicitation. So I'm going to kick things off here. If you could advance the slide, thank you. So purpose today is to discuss we have three things we want to focus on for this today. As Joe mentioned, that we are going to ask for some action on this in November. So we're going to go over the proposed funding targets for the application categories, the minimum and maximum awards for these funding categories, and then discuss any other and offer some feedback on some of the qualifying requirements and rules that are changing as part of solicitation. I'm also going to confirm the application categories, which I know have been a topic for a while and have been tweaked slightly over the last year, but we're nearly final, I think, with those changes, and we'll present those as well. So just a little, so a couple of project updates. So since the last time we met with TAC, which was back in April, we have spent time working with our special issue working groups. We had 2 workshops in April and in May. We had over 100 people participate in both workshops. We discussed a variety of topics from the application categories to the measures and criteria, eligibility requirements, and then the funding mins and maximums. This feedback really helped to shape what went into the final or the draft individual applications and the qualifying criteria that will be shared out with this group for review coming up here in mid-October. So we have had those draft applications have been reviewed by the technical steering committee and the 7 special issue working groups. We've incorporated their feedback and are going through kind of some final internal review and incorporating those comments, and then we'll send those out again in mid-October for a review. So looking ahead, we've got some future action items we're going to ask of this team. So focus right now, today's meeting, we'll talk about the application categories, the minimum and maximum awards, and then the funding targets. And then we'll ask for action on those in November. Fine requirements and the category measures and scoring guidance, so the percentages of points that are going to each of those criteria and measures, and then the specifics that go into those. And then the overall package will be released for public comment at the end of this year. So to confirm, here's where we're at with our proposed modal plus hybrid structure. This should be very similar to what was presented back in April and what many have seen over the last couple of months. Largely, it is very similar to the previous solicitation, where we have one of those middle blue boxes are those modal applications broken by bicycle and pedestrian, transit, and roadway. Some changes have been made in there. I will highlight that the light blue boxes under the bicycle and pedestrian are highlighting the line with the regional sales tax dollars. All the dark blue box above that for the regional bicycle facilities will be where the federal active transportation or money will go. And then the other maybe big change from the last solicitation was pulling out separate categories for safety. So this is mirroring the MnDOT HSIP program and will be more of a complement to that. So the funding maximum is higher for this category than HSIP currently is, and meant to kind of fund those larger safety focused projects. And then we also have an environment category to address some of maybe those unique projects that were coming up in the last solicitation. So EV charging is one. And then we did move the travel demand management category, into that environment category as well. All right, so maybe I will now pause and just ask any questions or comments there, or maybe I'll look to you, Mr. Chair, if we want to wait till the end to ask questions, or if we want to allow them throughout.
Yeah, I think it's probably best to allow questions throughout so we can address them as they come. Do any members or our funding and programming members have any questions at this time? If you can raise your hand, then I can see you easier. It's hard to, we got a pretty long list of people here today. Okay, not seeing any, Molly. I just keep moving forward and we'll stop as we need to.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Steve now, who's going to go through the funding targets.
Yeah, maybe the last thing on this slide here, Mr. Chair, worth mentioning is if you go back one, Molly, or Joe, in the environment column there, that money will be set aside. So before we did set it, we've always set aside travel demand management for more near-term implementation because those projects didn't need 4 or 5 years. We're proposing that same approach for the EV charging infrastructure, that they would need 4 to 5 years. And there are 2 other good things about that. First of which, Tony's study will be done, so we'll have some kind of clear indications on where the scoring and measures should go. Number 2, we should be past hopefully we'll be past the next surface transportation bill. And there may be some changes as far as eligibility for EV charging on where it is or is not eligible. And so it buys us a little time there to see how a new bill potentially shakes out. So next slide. Okay, one more. So another topic that we brought, I guess, both to the technical steering committee and to the policy work groups, we asked them the question, what either funding range or target or minimum amount would you like to show in the application? Not where do you want to, in the end, put the money, but where do you want to give applicants an indication where this money, how this money might be split up? So in the past, it was funding ranges. So we did modal funding ranges. Now the structure is a little bit different. So we looked back at both the midpoint of those ranges. You can see in the columns there's a midpoint number, and then also where spending was, and that's how we developed the historic where we put the money, and then we tried to take that in between the midpoint and the actual spending to come up with where in this new structure what a historic amount might be for the new category. So next slide. One more slide there, Joe. Lost him. I can take over here too.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's having technical difficulties. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay.
My apologies. I was asked a question. Am I on the right slide? I'll be on top of it.
Yeah, that works. So one recommendation that came originally from the technical steering committee, and this was good work on their part, was we said there's lots of ways you could do it. You could not set any ranges or minimums. You could set a minimum funding amount for these different categories. You could set targets, or you could set ranges like you have in the past. And what we heard from the technical steering committee, and this was good guidance, the policymakers work group took this up, was to set targets. And I think what we're hearing, especially from the policymakers, they want, because this is a new structure, they want to leave it very flexible, that we would build funding scenarios based off targets, but they want to see, one, what the general demand is, and then a year from now, 2, we would build funding scenarios based off of different policy objectives. You know, maybe there'd be a safety focused one, travel options one, et cetera, versus motorway or roadway, or versus transit versus bike ped like we had in the past, where we kind of shifted that up or down. So targets was the recommendation. from the Technical Steering Committee and now the Policymaker Work Group. Next slide, yep. So as far as the funding is concerned, we assume $250 million of federal funding over the 2 years. Again, this is 2030 and 2031. So these would be the last 2 years of a new transportation bill. So that's based on MnDOT targets, basically essentially holding steady or constant the federal funds from 26 and 27 onward. The other thing to note is that the active transportation dollars, looks like this solicitation, the recommendation is $50 million. And that was not included in this breakdown. So that was considered separate. Next slide, Joe. So again, this is roughly the historic midpoints. And so when we looked at past spending, that would put $30 million in safety, $35 million of federal in bike ped, plus the active transportation dollars, which about 50 million. So you might have $85 million of bike ped investment next go round. Safety, you'd couple the safety from this solicitation plus the Metro District competitive solicitation, another 30 million. So you could have 60 million there of very direct focused safety money. Transit, 60 million, roadways categories, 110 million, and then the environment, $15 million. Mr. Chair, looks like we got one hand up here.
Yep, I saw that. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Okay.
Hi, thank you. Can you just go back 1 second for the historical? This is, wait. Yeah.
To this new structure. And we didn't put it in this particular slide deck, but for instance, one of the things that we did was we had to come up with where the safety money came from.
Can you just show, like 2 slides ago, I think it was, Steve, you showed the ranges.
Yep, back here, Joe.
Okay, 1 sec. All right, thank you. That helps.
Yeah, so the 2 things we had to do was come up with where the safety, what types of projects would likely be funded under the safety based on historic things like the spot mobility and safety and some of the roadway modernization. So 80-some% of the safety categories came from what used to be the roadways pot of money, and the remainder, a little bit less than 20%, is coming from bike ped. So I guess 25 million from roadways, 5 million from bike ped based on the types of projects in the past that we've seen funded there. And so we'll see kind of what happens this first go around and people can adjust later. The other kind of split was we used to have transit and TDM was together in one pot. And so now we've split that. But TDM is now under the environment goal area, which is climate and natural systems. So those are the 2 splits that occurred. Looks like we have another question here.
Yep, go ahead, Brian.
Thanks, and Brian. So nominally we had talked about doing $8 million for travel demand management. In the past, that was $7 million. So all these categories, the maximum awards are going up a little bit. So 8 million for travel demand management, 7 million for EV charging. I think we would leave some flexibility in there too. Okay, thanks. On the applications, yeah.
Steve, wasn't some of the conversation as well as depending on where the EV program goes at a federal level, depending on what's in the reauthorization bill and what comes in the future, setting aside that 7 million, that could be pulled back into something else if need be as well, correct?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
And then maybe the last thing to point out on this slide is the regional model travel behavior inventory. And Jonathan Ehrlich from our staff is estimating that the request is going to be about $1.5 million. So similar to what it was last cycle. But that, the official amount goes through a travel forecasting committee for their validation on the activity. So we don't know if it's up or down a little bit from there, but that's a rough estimate on what he thinks that may end up being. Okay. Next slide. So the technical steering committee, of which Paul Omi is the chair, sent two options back to the policy work group and for their consideration. The first was based on mostly this historic spending and the midpoints. And so that's what we're showing as option one. And then I'd say about half the group at the technical steering committee said, well, safety is a higher priority in the 2050 TPP than it was in the 2040 plan. Should we on the front end put another $10 million towards safety? So bump that up from a target of 30 million to 40 million. Take that money out of the what is the roadways pot. So you can see how that goes from 110, drops down to 100. So that's how the math works out, a $10 million shift. And I think the policymakers that are recommending to go with the historic one, we will have funding scenarios that will address safety and kind of shift that dollar amount out. But they said based on what we want to show in the application, since it's just a target and we have no history of the number of applications we might get, let's just show the historic amount and just make sure that people understand it's not a minimum, it's not an absolute. There has to be some flexibility going into, especially this first round. Okay. Slide. The second column there is the 2024 max. So that used to be a $25 million maximum award. And the public said, well, a lot of these categories are increasing. Most of them kind of 7 to 10 million are going up. Probably should be an increase for arterial bus rapid transit too. So the two numbers they were playing with a little bit were either $30 million for a maximum award or $35 million for a maximum award. And what the policy work group is recommending based on the last meeting was to, they shifted a little bit here so that the minimum award would be $30 million for arterial bus rapid transit. And they said it could go up from there, but if it does go up above $30 million, that money would come out of the transit pool. So again, that transit pool, the target was $60 million. And I think a few of the members on the policy work group didn't love kind of the number of projects that had been submitted in the transit categories in the past, or were lacking. And you may remember the last few cycles we've shifted money mostly to bike ped because of a lack of transit applications. So I think that was in the back of their mind that ABRT, those projects are now, those corridors are now, $125 million or more. They're getting longer and more expensive, just like any project. And to reserve the right that if they don't like the last few projects on the transit list, that they could shift some of that money. They didn't tell us how much, but some of that money to our arterial bus rapid transit, but it would still come out of that transit pool. So maybe that's a good place to pause, Mr. Chair, and see if people have questions about targets, minimums, maximums.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I'm curious. So does the maximum would be unspecified, or are they still trying to decide? And then the related question is, how would we decide what transit projects would be sacrificed? Would that be a TAB decision, or would that be a Metro Transit decision?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I think that's an open question that we should bring back to the policymakers is, do they want to show a maximum amount? It was unclear from that last policy meeting if that number is 35 or something different. So I think we need clarification from the group. And I think it sounds like they want TAB to make a decision. that would be a tab decision. They also talked about, well, what if Metro Transit's next on the list? And maybe that's where you're going, Brian. Metro Transit's next on the list for a $5 million project. Should they have the choice essentially of taking more for ABRT versus federalizing another transit expansion project?
That's precisely where it was going,
Yeah.
Steve.
Yeah, okay. And I guess that makes some level of sense to me that if they were next on the list, that would be part of the discussion, I would think. But the way it was framed was more like a tab decision in the end, which it has to be. But
Any other questions at this time? Yeah, Emily.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question here on the maximums. I see roadway modernization went up from $7 to $10 million, but I noticed some of the other categories like bridge connections or regional bike facilities didn't go up by the same amount, or they seem to be similar to the 2024 maximums. I was just wondering if there was any other information on why not all of the proposed categories increased for maximums.
Thanks, Emily.
Yeah,
Steve or Molly?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair and Emily for the question. That's a good one. I think so first on bridges, I go to their second part first. On bridges, the special issue working group didn't recommend raising it. You could see that could go from 7 to 10, pretty easily just with inflation. When we look back at the bridge projects that were funded, you either had a lot of like $3 to $5 million bridge projects or really big bridge projects that were, Kellogg Bridge or Nicollet was another one this last time in Minneapolis that we funded that was big. And so there was a bunch of smaller ones and a few big ones that came in each cycle. And I think given kind of that average size we were funding, that's why that special issue working group recommended keeping it at 7 versus a lot of these other ones move from 7 to 10. That's my memory there. And then and Molly can chime in here too, but on the bike facilities, regional bike facilities, the last maybe 2 cycles has recommended lowering that down from 5.5 to $3.5 million because the first few projects were always taking a lot of that pot of money. So now we have that at what, $35 million would be in that regional bike facilities. I think it was more to a greater extent versus
at the amount that federal award for the multi-use trail application. So that's now the regional bikeway facilities. And largely we were seeing like the average award was far less than that 5.5 million. So there were some that did max out, but a lot of them came in much lower than that. I think around 3.6 million was the average award. So there wasn't as much data to support a raising there. And as you can appreciate, if you raise them all, that means just less projects overall. So we felt like based on technical input that there was a lot more interest in raising the maximum for the roadway applications and the ABRT transit category than the other ones, the bridge one and the multi-use trail one, as Steve mentioned.
Thank you.
Emily, is it? Yeah. Thanks, Emily, for the question. Any other questions at this time? Okay, not seeing any chime up. Please continue.
Yeah. Next slide, Joe, please. So this one focuses on active transportation and what's being recommended there. Maybe just to go through this, and Joe Whiting will touch on this too, is the only recent changes that active transportation planning, a new planning grant, no minimum award is the recommendation coming out of the active transportation work group. So that's maybe one thing to point out in this one. Let's see all Joe Whiting's thunder, so we'll continue on here. So at the October funding and programming and then the November TAC meeting, these will be the action items coming before you, and things like the minimum and maximum awards. If the group has good discussion and wants to recommend something different, that's what these groups are for. So, you've got recommendations coming out of the special issue working groups or the policy group or the technical steering committee. And now it's going to a broader group for discussion. So we expect that there will be changes along the way on all that. So this is a look at the schedule. Next slide. Did want to touch on one of the new qualifying requirements. And that has to do with the 2023 legislation on greenhouse gas assessments that was passed. And now, as of February of 2025, any project entering the TIP has to offset both greenhouse gases and VMT. So this process will be one of the first, if not the first, to have to go through the process. It's only for a select amount of projects, so it might only end up being for 1 or 2 projects through the solicitation, because it has to be either a lane expansion project or an interchange project on MnDOT system greater than $15 million. And so with all those caveats, it's only a small select amount of projects, probably 1 or 2 that have to be impacted. So we did write up a qualifying requirement, basically that the TAB and the council will get the offsets from other projects. And so say we have Fund 1 interchange project. That project sponsor will need to, as part of their application, submit any local offsets from other transit or bike bed projects in the local area. First, the next step is kind of as spelled out in legislation, is that at the regional level, they can use regional offsets to get the goal is to get the project back to net neutral. But this is only for a one cycle deal. Then the next regional solicitation cycle, it moves from projects.
For the equitable and inclusive community considerations, what we are doing with this TPP goal is using it with one exception that I'll cover later. So anyway, similar to the other interest groups, we formed an interest group on this criteria, not on the application category. And our interest group, I think most people who were on that, including the chair here, didn't really know what they were getting into. But our interest group met, I was counting it up, and I think it was 5 times for 2 to 3 hours over the past 5 months. And then on top of that, we had an online meeting that lasted a couple hours too. So a lot of input and feedback from the interest group. Really appreciate the participation of those individuals. And I think a number of you are on here today, and I welcome any feedback you want to give too. So the community considerations group really spent a lot of time looking at what to do with this criteria and measures. And so going back to what we previously had in the solicitation, we had equity measures. We had 3 measures, a little bit similar to what you're seeing here as the proposed measure. Just as a reminder, the past measures included a measure of community engagement. So a broad description previously of how communities, focusing on communities of color, low income, indigenous, disabled, youth, and seniors. Those are the communities that TAB in 2014 really identified as communities that we need to prioritize and pay more attention to, if you will, that we really need to recognize the specific transportation needs of these communities and identify where and how they exist in our overall communities. So previously we had engagement, we had community benefits and impacts, and you're heavily to the degree that affordable housing really represents the low income populations. That's what we're recognizing this time. And we're pulling forward low income, people of color, disabled, youth, and senior as specific communities that we really want applicants to acknowledge and pay attention to. So that's where we've been with the solicitation. Since the solicitation and over the past 5 years, another piece that we brought into the interest group is that the council has done quite a bit of work in the area of equity and community and engagement. And so we have developed what we call an equity framework that is included in the 2050 TPP. It is in the previous slides, but the equity framework talks about 3 pieces of, I tend to call it a 3-legged stool, but when you're talking about equity, there are 3 pieces of work that really need to be included, and the measures that we are proposing here follow that framework. The first is that equity work really needs to be mired and in an understanding of community data, the context of the community, and that includes the history of the community along with the culture and resources that are available in the community. So the first measure that we are proposing and was approved by our interest group is community data and context. And so that question really focuses on the applicant providing a response that shows that they really understand who lives near and is impacted by a project, who, what are the demographics of the community, focusing, as I said, on specific communities, but not only those communities. And what we're really asking applicants to do is to go beyond the census data a bit and really identify communities and tell a story about the community, if you will. Who lives there? Where is the affordable housing located? What destinations are important to the community and need to be accessed? And the applicant in this first measure really should demonstrate that they have an in-depth knowledge and understanding of the community that will be impacted, that the project is in, the people that will be impacted by the project and served by the project. So that is the first measure on data and context. And then the second measure is community engagement, which is also the second kind of leg of the stool in our equity framework, that when you are working in a community that we really need to prioritize engagement, but that also engagement with underrepresented and overburdened communities is a priority within that engagement. And so the engagement measure is asking that applicants demonstrate that, not that they have engaged the community on the project. I think this is one thing we've been continuing to work on. We might need to find different wording here. But the engagement that we're asking about is, how do you know that this project is needed? What problem is the project trying to solve? How did you engage and learn from community that this is an issue for the community that needs to be solved with this transportation project? So the engagement is really about the project purpose and need. I've been told not to use purpose and need because that's too close to NEPA, but that's really what this is about, is why are you proposing this project in this community? Why is it needed? How do they know? How do you know about this need? Did you hear about this need from the community? We also ask at a higher level for the applicant to address at the specific communities where the project is located. And so the third piece measure here is that the applicant should describe how the project is delivering meaningful benefits to the communities where the project community benefits. And then Steve, if you want to go to the next slide. There. So as I said, these three measures for the community considerations criteria are going to be included in each of the application categories. We are proposing that 20% of the points within those application categories be score the measures using a scale, a 5-point scale essentially, but no, not numeric. It's going to be low, medium, high, and high ratings on each of the three measures. And one of the things we really want to emphasize here is that high ratings really are going to be somewhat rare. We want them to be a goal for applicants to try to achieve, and it will be high ratings really will be given only to those projects that document really best practices. And to achieve that kind of high standard, we are going to be offering training for the scorers, but also for agency staff and really anyone within the region who wants to dig in on this issue. We will have both an in-depth training option, and we will have a webinar later this winter that talks about these specific measures and what they mean, how to achieve them, what is the scoring rubric. And we're going to require all scorers to take that training so that when we go into scoring of this measure, we really have a group of people that are at the same starting point, have the same expectations within these measures, and have similar understanding of how to score. The final piece of this criteria, as I mentioned previously, maybe I didn't mention this actually, previously we have had bonus points. So the old solicitation had, if under the equity criteria, you scored 80% of the points or higher, you were eligible for a bonus points. And the level of bonus points, everyone would get them, but the level varied based on the location of the project and whether the project was in a community that had a concentration of people. A number of projects that got bonus last time, and we've looked at it, and those bonus points really were given to projects all around the region. They were not necessarily focused in urban areas because the bonus points were focused on how applicants addressed these issues. With this version, we're slightly shifting that concept to something that we want to probably rename from funding guarantee to funding priority. And the concept—
Amy, sorry to interrupt you 1 second. I know very deep.
After Amy's done, so.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Amy, I just wanted to make sure we had time for Joe.
You know what? I apologize. I forgot Joe was on after us. I thought we were last. Anyway, all right. Well, I will kind of wrap it up here and just say the funding guarantee that we're proposing is that any project that gets a high across the three measures would be eligible to receive funding. And essentially, we would look at projects that aren't already funded. Many of these projects will already be funded through the other categories, but if there was a project that received a high rating and had not otherwise been funded or suggested for funding in our scenarios, we would guarantee that that project is funded. And the reasoning kind of behind that came out of our interest group discussions is that this is the one TPP goal that does not have its own category. Safety, resilient and dynamic climate, they have categories that will essentially guarantee that the highest scoring projects that meet those goals will be funded. So this is a way of essentially setting up kind of a separate category for those projects that score the highest on community considerations and otherwise aren't being funded through the other categories. So with that, I will stop. And I see Molly has a question too.
Yeah, go ahead, Molly.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Amy. I was going to follow up with that last bullet point that you were talking about. The group did meet yesterday and had gone through some pilot testing. I just wanted to point out that it's going to be pretty difficult for any project to receive the high funding. I think we scored 4 projects that we all thought were would meet a lot of these things. And across, I think we had 6 people doing the pilot scoring. No project received the high when you average out the score. So I know there was some concerns at that policymaker meeting last week that maybe a project that is not is quote unquote good, but scores well in this category would get funding. But I think you know, maybe with the training for scores, but it's going to be a pretty high bar for any project to receive that.
Thank you, Molly.
If I might add to that too, one of the things the interest group just recommended just yesterday is that even with training of the scorers, you still can get a lot of variation in understanding of the measures. And so one of our recommendations is that we have 2 scorers across each of the application categories for these measures, and we will average their scores for the final score, which will help in case you have a score that is way too low or way too high. But that's not the intent, because we're hoping with the training that we have similar understanding of the measures.
Thank you. Kathleen, it looks like you're next.
Thanks. I have a comment, I think, and a question. For context, I was a part of this working group. I didn't make the meeting yesterday. It's interesting to hear that none of them met high. And I like what you said, Amy, in terms of this is a way to guarantee that this category would select a project. So if we're not meeting that with the way that these are being scored, then maybe we need to reconsider that and lower standard or whatever it may be, right? To like, I guess, fund a project that does the best rather than high. So that's just one comment, but a related question to something, Steve, I think you presented on earlier, or said that, like, are we guaranteeing that a project be funded in each of the other categories? We have some new categories this year, or is it bucketed at the like background, I don't know, shape that you had, right? Where there's like 3 categories in it. Does each one of them get a guaranteed project, or is it just the bundle?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Kathleen, for the question. Yeah, the targets are based on those larger categories. So there's usually 2 or 3 application categories within that target area. And we don't have a rule in there that you have to fund a project. That's up to TAB's discretion. I'll say we normally do though.
Yep.
Especially if there's applications and stuff not to fund it, the top project there. But there's no rule stating that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because it seems like with some of the new categories, they're just such big dollar values too that that's a good clarification. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Chad?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just some comments again, understanding what this is trying to do for, to fund high scoring community consideration projects, but just we don't support the terminology of guaranteeing the funding without kind of seeing how this works with a new system and new scoring and new criteria. I think definitely more supportive of maybe what Amy kind of mentioned of a funding priority call out for funding consideration of the technical working groups to look at and obviously tab. So just wanted to voice that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chad. Any other comments or questions on this item? Otherwise, we'll keep moving to make sure we got some time for Joe here. Okay, Chad, or sorry, Steve. So you're just going to skip the rest of the items here? You want to cruise through them quick, or?
Molly will just do this last slide, and we do have the score sheets available for people to start reviewing over the next 2 months, and that's what's after slide 23 here. But we don't obviously have time to go through those today. But Molly, anything on the next steps?
No, I'll just maybe note that those score sheets we'll bring up and discuss in more detail at the TAC FRMP committee meeting on the 15th. So, or the 16th, sorry. So there'll be opportunity to discuss it more.
All right, thank you both. We'll turn it over here to Joel. Floor is yours.
All righty. Okay, we're gonna keep going here. I'm gonna take control. Thank you, Joe. And then we will talk a little bit about AT. So Steve, thank you for covering some of that. We don't want that there. No, what the heck? Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. All right, now I've got this blocking my view. Okay, there we go. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay, come on. Here we go. All right. So we'll jump right in here. So we saw this earlier, so I just want to reconfirm that we are specifically looking at our regional active transportation funded categories. So that's our local bike, our local pedestrian facilities, and our active transportation planning. So over the last year and a half now, we've been talking in the active transportation working group with TAB members and some of our technical friends as well in those meetings. And, we've been going through a lot of different policy questions, and we're getting close to wrapping this up next month. But we'll kind of get a quick recap of what we've discussed and kind of what the decision points have been so far, and a little time to discuss and get some feedback on some upcoming decision points in October, which we will be deciding on at that point for recommendations to send to the full TAB. But as I mentioned, so the group has a meeting monthly to make these recommendations on some key policy topics for the upcoming solicitation. So some of these key policy topics have been local match requirements, our minimum maximum award amounts, our funding target for the 26 solicitation, geographic balance considerations, and then also our solicitation schedule and the relationship with federal regional solicitation. So how is the active transportation solicitation going to fit within the existing regional solicitation process, biennial, annual, things like that. We'll kind of get more details on that in a second. All right. But real quick, I'm going to just kind of go over some of the recommendations we've got so far from the working group and kind of how they're fitting in with these packages of action items which will be coming through the TAB TAC process in October, November, and December. Some of the project categories. So through this review process, the working group actually helped recommend the structure that we're seeing today. That's the categories we're seeing today. So those active transportation funded projects will be separated from the federally funded projects by category. So your local bike, ped, and planning. And then also then to create an additional new category for specifically planning for active transportation. On the minimum maximum award sides, the working group concurred with the proposed maximum awards for those active transportation categories. That's $3.5 million for local bike, $2.5 million for pedestrian, and then that $200,000 for planning. The group did come in and actually recommended to reduce the minimum for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure to that $150,000 you saw today. Really the intention there is to have a nice, pretty wide spread of smaller projects to larger projects that local governments can apply for in their local areas to sort of we kind of get a good spread of projects in this first solicitation. And then also the additional was that active transportation planning would have no minimum award amount because, again, we're looking for a nice spread of planning. And really, I think with this planning at in 2026, it's going to be a lot of focus on that comprehensive planning. So we know in the city side, comp planning will be kicking off probably next year. And so this could be potentially a source for aiding in your developing the pedestrian and bicycle elements of your local comprehensive plans as planning applying for this funding. Additionally, we do have now a funding target recommendation. I know we had a previous slide in those other slides, but we did get that recommendation on Monday here of this week. And so the funding target for the active transportation solicitation will be $50 million with a 5% reserve. So that'd be 5% on top of the 50, so about 2.5 million in reserve just for cash flow purposes. And we're also looking to have a funding target, a sub-target within the planning category of 2 million. Haven't got a recommendation on that 2 million yet. We're likely to get that in October, but that's really the direction that we're looking at here. So about 48 million then for infrastructure and about 2 million for planning is likely expected for 2026. And then thinking about that second batch of recommendations going that the later batch of action items in November, local match, so likely to be a no or very small local match required. So the working group didn't get a consensus on a specific no or a number. That'll be going to the tab likely as either a 0% match or at max maybe a 5% local match for 2026 selected projects. And it might be something like for your planning, you'll have a no match, and then like for infrastructure, there might be a small 5% match. That'll be figured out at the tab level as we move forward. Project funding eligibility, so to connect to the local match, so the working group has recommended to allow for design and engineering of selected projects to be eligible for grant funding in addition to construction. It'd be a little different than I think we've done in the past, right? Federal projects are generally those construction elements only are going to be eligible, but with this active transportation funding, we're now going to widen that out to allowing for design and engineering of projects to also be eligible for grant funding. On the project category application, so those will be going through with your federal application details and things like that. So your questions, qualifying and criteria and scoring measures, that'll be moving through at the later time. And then also an additional topic we have begun to discuss, and we'll likely get to a recommendation later this month, is geographic balance. So what measures, if any, should be established at the policy level to ensure these active transportation funds are distributed across the region? And so that's something we're discussing currently. And we'll go right into that. So the first question, as I mentioned, was that geographic balance question. So really, we have three options we presented to the work group on Monday, and they had a pretty robust discussion about considering what we should be doing with these funds. First option is really looking at doing nothing. So we're going to have additional $50 million, right, for active transportation in the region. So looking at this as potentially doing nothing to see how our balance actually kind of naturally leads itself out in that way. For our pilot program in 24, we actually did get to 6 of 7 counties, and we got rural areas, suburban areas, and urban areas with those funding. So potentially we might not be able to do anything, and we can see that balance kind of naturally lay out. Another option, we just split these funding, the AT funding into 3 geographic buckets based upon the 2050 community designations, so your suburban, urban, and rural, and distribute that funding potentially based upon population or employment in those areas. And then finally, another option that the group is considering is to guarantee at least one project from the urban, suburban, and rural areas, or to limit the number of applications for each agency to ensure that the funding is spread around the region in that way. And then so looking at the geographic bucket to see how that would look, you've got your urban areas, your suburban areas, and your rural areas kind of split out like that. And if we did by population or jobs, you'd get anywhere from a range of 14 to 21 for the urban, 18 to 25 for the suburban, and 2 to 5.5 for rural. I'll note in the discussion we had on Monday, the group actually was leaning towards potentially doing nothing and having a kind of a typical tab process at the end, when you get your projects and your target and figure out where projects should be selected or not. So we haven't got an answer on that yet, but it's sounding like we're potentially moving towards that do nothing for this first round to see kind of how it all lays out. Finally, we also will be considering looking beyond 26, so kind of thinking about that solicitation schedule for 26, but also then beyond. So the key questions here for the active transportation solicitation really are, is this a solicitation that should be held annually? So every year we should be having about 20 to 25 million available for funding for projects in the region, or continue a biennial process, which could be either in line with the regional solicitation, so concurrently is it likely to be in 26, or potentially have it staggered from year to year. So you have a 26, say, federal, 27 AT, 28 federal, 29 AT. So kind of having those solicitations at different times of the year, and so have those kind of flip off one or the other. And then so the question's really asking here is, do we want to then also have a concurrent release? So again, in line with the regional station, or potentially they could be in the same year, but have them staggered, right? So you could have your federal released in May, say, and your local or active transportation released in March or something like that, to give a little time between those two. And additionally, a question we are asking the group as well, and we want to get a little feedback here, and we only got 5 minutes, but if anyone has any feelings on this, but an option we're also considering for 26, so thinking about next year, is to release the active transportation solicitation a little earlier than the federal. So likely the federal might be going out in May of next year, so the active transportation would potentially go out in like March, right? So a couple months earlier. It's a new program, have our applicants get a little more understanding and feel for the program, and a little more time to apply for that program to make it easier to ask any questions and figure those things out at this new program. So I kind of flew through that pretty quickly, but these last two questions really are one that we're still dealing with, and if we have any feedback from our technical partners here, we'd like to hear some more considerations. So I'd open it up to questions. I know we only got about 4 minutes, but if anyone's got any feedback.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel crazy strongly about this, but I think there's a preference to have this be off cycle from regional solicitation. I think particularly for smaller entities, we've been talking a lot about making sure smaller entities have the ability, if they're trying to put in for both regional solicitation and active transportation, it seems like the other piece here, I mean, this takes so much energy to score these, and I just don't see how we have the human power here to get all the scoring committees together for this. And then get TAB to make technically two completely different separations or separate decisions. It just seems like a lot. I think aligning them this year, sure, fine, but I would like to see them off kilter the next go around. If it's annual or biannually, I don't have a super strong, but I think it's just a lot to put on staff across every single entity, including consultants, if we do these together.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I saw a few reactions here at the bottom of the screen as well with a thumbs up and a heart. So others must be feeling the same way. Any other comments on that or any of the other items that he brought up? Be quiet group today. Joe, I had one last one just as kind of a confirmation. I think most of us have been following along, at least detailed enough to understand this process. But again, this program here is not going to go through the state aid process. This is something that council staff will be doing in-house to monitor this program, correct? So on the backside of this, if you receive funding, you're going to be following some process through Met Council staff and not state aid staff.
Chairman McPherson, that is true, yes. So because these funds are generated locally and they are going through the tab, they will be managed by the council and not by our partners at MnDOT, because they've got plenty to do on their already. We are currently working on staffing up, so we just hired a new grants coordinator who will be focusing on the active transportation grants. So we are getting some new staff. I've been, serving as the back end to reviewing site plans and things that they come through the process to make sure they meet those requirements and what we've, what they applied for. So yeah, so we are doing this all in house. So that's another consideration, right? Is we all right, we haven't done this before, so this is all new for us too. So it's definitely something we're thinking about.
All right, thanks, Joe. Any other questions? I know we got just a couple minutes left. It's a lot of information. Not seeing any questions. Again, if you have any, feel free to reach out to this team. As was alluded to earlier by Steve and Molly, there will be more information coming out in the next week or so. The action items are going to be coming forward through funding and programming, and then subsequently through TAC and TAB. And it's going to be broken into a couple different buckets of actions. So again, check in with your teams. If you personally haven't been involved in these special issue working groups or the technical steering committee, I encourage you to reach out to your team members that have. There's been a lot of work involved. I compliment everyone that's been assisting with this. It's a big lift, and I appreciate all the time, both on the agency side and Met Council side and our consultant team. So kudos to all of you for being involved. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just say one more shout, I said this with our active transportation working group as well, is, as we move forward into next year, if, on the active transportation solicitation specifically, if you want me to come out and speak to your city council or, other members of your public to kind of get more awareness of this, with county boards, things like that, I'm definitely willing to come out and talk more about this to get the people aware of what's going on and the opportunities I think that are coming in 26 that maybe some aren't aware of.
Thanks, Joe. All right. I don't see any other questions popping up, so we're right at 11 o'clock. Appreciate everyone's time, and sticking in there a little bit longer, but we'll consider the meeting adjourned unless there's any other business items. Does anyone have anything to add here quickly at the end? Molly, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair and members. I just wanted to let you know the MnDOT Metro District Freight Plan is out for public comments. I think Mackenzie is going to throw a link in the chat, and if I know we covered this at our Capital Improvements Committee CIC meeting. Mackenzie has done a presentation, so please have a look at it. If you have comments or thoughts about the district freight plan, we would love to hear it.
Thanks, Molly. All right, with that, I don't see any other hands. I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.